Okay, hi, and welcome to our Rig Run Recovery Zone webinar. My name's Sarah, and I'm a fitness advisor here at Rig Run. And today I'm going to hand you over to our guest, Myles Edwards. Myles is a previous 1500-meter Scottish champion and co-founder of the charity, the Myles Edwards Foundation, that supports children in Kenya. So today, Myles is going to talk to us about the athlete mindset. And I'm sure that you will all learn some really good tips on how to stay on track and prepare for the September qualifiers. If you've got any questions, if you put them into the chat, and we will hopefully have time to get around to them at the end of the presentation. So it's over to you, Myles.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to everybody for tuning in today. The title of the presentation is obviously the athlete mindset, but I'd like us to think of the mindset just being a mindset of resilience and one where there's a desire to improve. And I hope that my presentation today shows that it's the same principles no matter what level you're at or what challenge you're facing. All of us can have that mindset, whether you call it the athlete mindset or just think of it as a mindset of resilience. So I hope there's something that everybody can take away from today. I'm going to start off just by giving everyone a brief bit of background to myself and how I got involved in running, but the majority of this presentation will focus on sharing the stories of inspiring people that I've met along the way, whether that be through running or my work with the charity in Kenya. And I'll also do my best to share some of my experiences and tips as well. So as you can see from this photo here, that's me on the right running with my dad, Myles Edwards. So I've been involved in running since a very young age. And I'm told that on the few days after I was born, before going home from hospital for the first time, I was taken via a cross-country race at Balgownie playing fields in Aberdeen to cheer on some of my dad's friends and for my dad. I would say my mum and dad to introduce me, but it was definitely my dad's plan to introduce me to some of his friends there. So I think I was always destined for a life in athletics, and my dad was without a doubt one of my biggest heroes. He sadly passed away in 2019, but I'll never forget, he was diagnosed with myeloma, bone marrow cancer, in 2006, and he in the early days had to have a stem cell transplant. And I'll always remember my mum and I going to visit him in isolation in the hospital in Aberdeen, and as we went up towards his room, behind the curtain, you could kind of see this funny motion going on. And as we entered the room, he was hooked up to his IV drip in one arm, and he'd had an exercise bike installed into the room where he was hammering away on this thing, sweat dripping off him. And I always think back to that now, whether it's a challenging situation with work or it's a painful cross-country race. For example, I did the Barra 10K supporting Keely's Wee Stars at the weekend, and it has a brutal hill in it. And I think to how my dad dealt with cancer, and it makes me think if he dealt with cancer in that way, it makes the challenge I'm dealing with at that point in time a little bit more achievable. And I'm sure we've all got people in our lives that have got that similar resilience, and it's important to be inspired by them. The photo on the right was my dad just a couple of weeks before he passed away, and those of you who have either had cancer or know somebody with cancer will know there's a lot of ups and downs, and he picked up pneumonia a few times during those final couple of months. And on one occasion, it was in the evening, and the doctor, Stephanie up at the hospital, left her shift, and it wasn't clear if my dad was going to make it till the morning or not. And as she came back into the room the next morning, she was greeted with this sight of my dad doing resistance band exercises. And so again, it's just an example of how he inspired me along the way with his resilience when he was battling cancer. So growing up, I attended Mile End Primary School and Aberdeen Grammar School in Aberdeen, and then went on to Edinburgh Napier University to study journalism. But when I was growing up, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. My parents always just encouraged me to follow what I was passionate about. One thing I did know that I loved was running. And so in 2009, I was given the opportunity to pace make for a 1 mile race for the opening of Aberdeen Sports Village. And the goal that day was for these two Kenyan athletes on the right-hand side, Gideon Gathimba and Bethwell Bergen, to break 4 minutes for the first time in Aberdeen. And we had a meeting with Gideon and Bethwell before the race to ask what pace they wanted us to take them through 400 meters and 800 meters in. And it became apparent to me very quickly that I wasn't going to be able to keep up even for the first half of the race. So in the end, I pacemate for some of the British athletes on the left-hand side, and Gideon Gathimba and Bethwell Bergen went on and ran 3 minutes and 57 seconds for the mile, which was the first time it had ever happened in Aberdeen. And I think probably was the start of me having a fascination with Kenyan athletics and how it was possible for these men and women to be so fast. That's Gideon on his way to the 3 minutes and 57 seconds. 2 years after that, I was given the opportunity to go out to Kenya. So not through Gideon himself, but I had stayed in touch with him. But a friend of mine, Dan Mulhare, in the red t-shirt there, invited me to go out to Kenya for 3 months training. And it took me all of about a minute to say yes. I just graduated from university and didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with my life. So off we went to Kenya, and within the first couple of days, as this photo shows, we met the lady on the right, who is Lynette Maasai, a former 10,000 metre world champion. She was our landlady in the house that we were renting. And then also in the green jacket, David Rudisha, who is the 800 metre world record holder, Commonwealth champion, Olympic champion, and world champion. And it's just an example in that town of Iten, so it's Iten in Kenya. It's 8,000 feet above sea level. And within a stone's throw of wherever you stay in that town, there will be world record holders, world champions, Olympic champions. And I do believe it's one of the reasons why Kenyans are so successful, in that as they're growing up, the bar is set very high. For me, perhaps a goal would have been an Aberdeen club record or a Scottish Championship medal, whereas the ambition levels of young Kenyan athletes are incredible. And it's a beautiful town as well, just on the edge of the Great Rift Valley in Kenya. This was our accommodation when we first arrived back in 2011. It was just one single mattress when Dan and I first arrived, and there was regular power cuts as well. So we were quite out of our comfort zones. This was our kitchen back in that first house, and the toilet facilities as well. So it took quite a bit of time to get used to, but not too far away from where we were staying, there's a camp where lots of foreign athletes go to stay, and there's gym and swimming pool and different things. But for us, I'm really glad that we did it in the way that we did, because I feel like we got to meet more Kenyan athletes and also learn from them what it is that makes them successful. Unfortunately, on that first trip, I was injured for the whole time. So I was on a gym exercise bike, just watching people run by the window. But this made me really determined to go back. And so in 2012, I went back again and was able to train consistently there. But what was eye-opening for me was that a lot of these male and female athletes were training sometimes up to 3 times a day. So they'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, they'd go for an easy jog, come back, breakfast, maybe have a short nap, and then again at 10, 11 o'clock, they'd do their interval training session or longer run, and then they'd come back and relax, have lunch, and sometimes they go for a third run in the afternoon. And for me, up until that point, I was probably only training 4 or 5 times a week. Excuse me. So to see just how hard they were working, I realized I needed to work a lot harder if I wanted to be successful and try and beat some of these athletes. One of the best examples of a successful Kenyan athlete is Eliud Kipchoge, who some of you I'm sure will recognize. He's also a great example of somebody who's shown that you don't need the best facilities in life to be successful. So the previous slide, which I showed, is the track where all these world and Olympic champions train. And as Eliud Kipchoge has shown as well, this camp he continues to stay in. He's made millions and millions of pounds from running, but until very recently he shared a room at this camp as well. But that's the room that he stays in at the bottom left, and you can see from the bottom right the weight equipment that he uses, just weights made out of concrete. And he still takes his turn washing shoes and doing the chores in that camp. And I think that's a big part of a successful athlete's mindset, is that if you can remain humble and stick to the principles that got you to where you are more likely to have a prolonged and consistent success throughout your career. E10 can be an inspiring place when you're training, but it can also be a pretty humbling place as well. And you can be in the middle of a session like I was here, and you're hitting times that you're really, really pleased with, and you're thinking about what race you might be able to do well in when you get back. And then you've got a kid who just runs alongside you in flip-flops, smiling away, and is easily able to keep up with you. So as I say, it can be a humbling place, but it's also really, really inspiring, and you can see just the talent that some of these children have. 1 year after that, in 2013, I was able to go back to Kenya and spend time living with Gideon Gathimba and his family in a town called Karatina, which is about 8 hours drive from Iten. and had some amazing experiences, including meeting his great-grandmother, who said that she was 122 years old. I'm not entirely sure how accurate that was, but an amazingly fit and able lady. And through the work that we do supporting children in Kenya, we see many of the children don't have birth certificates. And so that was the reason this great-grandmother didn't exactly know her age, but she'd based her age on remembering when a local railway station had been built and obviously knowing that year. So that was one of many great experiences. The experience which stood out for me the most and had the biggest impact was a visit to the Pavilion Village Children's Home. And Gideon had been supporting the home with food from his farm for a period of time. And when we visited, there was 22 children in the home looked after by John and Agnes, the parents of the home. And many of the children were there due to having lost their parents due to HIV or having been abused by their biological parents. But the thing that struck us when we were shown around was that they were so happy to be there, despite, as we saw it, the surroundings being quite difficult. So there was broken windows, the bedrooms on the left were very basic and didn't have proper mattresses, and also that's the outdoor kitchen on the right. This is a photo I took of the bedroom where they were sleeping. So it was really thin pieces of foam that they were sleeping on instead of mattresses. And I posted this picture on my Facebook page when I got back from that trip to Kenya, and set the goal of trying to buy a mattress for each of those children for that Christmas. And amazingly, just after a few days, people had donated almost 3 times that amount, and we were able to get some of the children back into school. They'd been out of school due to a lack of fees, and we were able to get the mattresses delivered. And it was that inspired us to continue with more fundraising. So we've seen children like Peter on the left from Pavilion Village go on to graduate from University in Nairobi with a degree in criminology. And we've been able to welcome lots of new children to the home as well. And it's 45 children that have stayed at Pavilion Village now in total. Throughout all of these experiences, I could see that Gideon Gathimba was different from a lot of the people that I'd met. Certainly compared to some of the other athletes, many people come to Kenya and they train and they benefit from the training there and some of the facilities as well, but they're often on runs, unknowingly running past children that are in really desperate situations. But it was clear to me that Gideon was very different. He was always keen to help children in different communities from different tribes as much as possible. And so that inspired us to set up the Gathimba Edwards Foundation, which has gone on to support 582 children through school and college and university. And we've been able to build 50 houses, and as well as running ongoing food, farming and psychosocial support. And finally, we also have an initiative called the Neil Jaffrey Initiative, which supports children with disabilities in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, which I'll touch on in a couple of moments' time. So in terms of my career as an athlete and what I hope that I can share experience-wise today, I previously did 1500 meter running. I'm focusing a bit more on 10Ks and half marathons now, with a view to do my first marathon next year. These 4 pictures were all taken in 2015, and they're special in different ways. So the one at the top left was the Scottish Indoor Championships. So it was the first Scottish Championship gold medal that I'd been able to win. It meant a lot because I was really motivated by the memory of a friend of mine, Neil Jaffrey, who'd passed away the year before. At the top right, the Scottish Championships in Aberdeen outdoors that year. I wasn't expected to win, probably wasn't even expected to medal, but managed to surprise myself on the day. But the one I want to highlight most is the one at the bottom left. And this was my first time racing for Scotland. It was indoors. And the lesson I learned from that day was that there's no failure in sport. So important to have your own goals, because on paper in that race, I was the slowest by far, and I think I was 8 seconds slower on paper than the next slowest athlete. And so I knew the race was going to go one of 2 ways. It was either going to go hard from the start and I had to hang on. And as you can see from the photo on the right, that's exactly what happened. So it was a pretty painful second half. I hung on until about halfway and then just had to dig in. Really nervous before the race. But as you can see from the photo at the top left, that's me sitting on the track just before the start. There was about a 15-minute delay to the start, and it actually helped my nerves settle because it was a Scottish crowd in Glasgow. There was 500 miles playing on the tannoy, and by the time I actually got to the start, I felt more ready than had it been 15 minutes earlier. And the race, of course, went as it did, but I dug in and managed to run a personal best. So of all the races I've done, it's one of, maybe not my exact favorite, but one of my favorites, and I finished last. So I think it's so important to to have your own goals and not to compare yourself to others too much as well. This is a quote I wanted to share from a late friend of my dad's called Mike Turner, who was the team manager of the British Olympic team in 1988 at the Seoul Olympics. And he said, it matters not what your difficulty is or what level you're at. What matters is that you try to overcome it or improve a little at a time. And that is what will give you the satisfaction and the confidence and motivation to keep persevering. And I think this is really a really important message. Mike, in his latter years, faced huge health challenges. He had to have both legs amputated. And I'll never forget visiting him and asking him how he was doing. And he said, Myles, what's left of me is 100%. And I could take away from that the challenges I were facing were much smaller, and Mike was still able to have that attitude. And I think it's really important just to focus every day on just doing something small that can improve you a little bit. Sometimes the end goal can be really daunting, but if you just focus on small improvements every day and consistency over a period of time, it can get you to where you want to be. And later that year, the memories of winning that Scottish Championship on an Aberdeen track, inspired by Neil Jaffrey and having my dad there on the track where I grew up was really special. So it was worth digging in all those hard training sessions and races leading up to that point. Following that race, as you can probably tell by the title here, I went through 2 years, just over 2 years of different injuries. So I did a 300-mile fundraising cycle and naively thought that my running fitness could take me through it. And so perhaps some of you doing the Rig Run Challenge can relate in terms of just the different fitnesses and strengths that are required for different activities. And we went from Glasgow to Edinburgh to Aberdeen to Inverness. And the goal was to try and do it in 24 hours. I think I managed to do it in 36 hours in the end. So way too ambitious for my level of cycling fitness. And what resulted from there was knee surgery, Achilles injuries, and then just as I was getting back to full fitness, I sort of had stayed resilient and I was ready to go again. Had a small shoulder problem, went for acupuncture and got a collapsed lung from the needle going in at the wrong angle. So it's sometimes hard on an injury journey when you think that you're getting back there and then there's another setback. But you just have to keep dealing with what's in front of you. You can have an end goal in sight, but it's sometimes impossible to know when you might be able to reach that end goal. So I think just focusing on leaving no stone unturned to fix the current challenge or problem that you're facing is the best way to approach that. And during that time, went through countless scans and different surgeries as well. But it makes it all worthwhile. I think when you do get back and you're able to enjoy what you love doing again, it makes it almost even sweeter. During that time, I saw athletes like Andrew Butcher, who on one occasion I was able to beat to win that Scottish Championship. And you see them going on to big things in World Championships and Olympics. And I'm not saying that I would have gone on to that level, but there's two ways to look at that. It can either be that you get really frustrated and you wish that you were there. Whereas I think it's good to try and look at the positive side of things and think that when you do get a consistent spell of training, anything is possible to achieve. And during that time, I did a lot of aqua jogging, and it's something I would recommend for anybody who's going through an injury. Ailish McColligan does a lot of this. And you sometimes feel a bit funny in the pool because you're working super hard. It's really hard to breathe when the belt's tight and you're working against the resistance of the water running underneath the water without your feet touching the ground. But it's a great way to maintain your fitness, and you just have to try not be too put off, even if on many occasions there's been an elderly man or lady doing breaststroke quicker than me at the side. But it's a really, really good way of maintaining your fitness. I'm fortunate enough in some ways that through my work I get to meet some amazing people that show incredible resilience, and it helps for me to keep things in perspective, because sport and running and it isn't the be all and end all. It's a fun part of life that you try to do your best at, but it's really important to keep things in perspective. And one of these amazing little girls is a girl called Evie, who sadly passed away a few years ago now, that we were fortunate enough to support through the Neil Jaffrey initiative. And Evie in her short life battled against severe dystonia, cerebral palsy, resistant epilepsy, but the way that her family were dedicated to caring for her and the smile that she had despite the challenges she was facing was really, really inspiring for me and many others. So I think it's really important to support other people that are going through tougher challenges than you, and also be inspired by their resilience as well. Another example of how I've been able to keep things in perspective is in Kenya. I forget the year exactly, but probably around 2018 or 2019. We were about to take part in a 10K race, and as you can see from the pictures on the right, these are pictures that my friend David and I didn't think it'd be sharing publicly again. We were completely shattered at the end of this race, one of the hardest races I've ever done. Part of the 10K is uphill, you're racing against Kenyans in the heat. But the day before, we'd been to visit this amazing lady called Rhoda, and Rhoda had been through the most violent attack I've heard of, as a, in terms of a story shared in person. She was the victim of domestic abuse, and on one final occasion, her husband attacked her with a machete, and she lost both her hands in that attack. Her little girl was also present when that was going on. But despite all of what Rhoda's been through, she may have lost her hands, but she never lost hope. She smiles all the time. She's started her own business. She does absolutely everything that she can. And so visiting Rhoda the day before really, really inspired us to push ourselves to the limits, as you can see. And I'm sure other people have inspiring people in their lives, and I think it is really important to be inspired by them and motivated by the likes of Rhoda, who has been through much tougher than what we went through in the race the next day. I like to think of, I won't go into each of these individual points individually, but I like to think of all the things that can improve you as an athlete, whether you're, it doesn't matter what sport you're focusing on. I like to think of them as part of a jigsaw, and the marginal gains approach is a term that was coined by Dave Beresford, the cycling guru. And it's just trying to improve in every little area, even if it's 1%. So there's all these different factors, and a couple of them I'll go into in more detail in a moment. But one that I wanted to highlight was being aware of external stressors. So if you're training for a goal, it's really important to be aware of maybe if you've had a hard couple of days with work, or a challenging family situation, or a lack of sleep, maybe you want to just adapt your training slightly, because it's very easy to think that, oh no, I've not done that session fully, and be down about that. But sometimes it's the right thing to do, and sometimes less is more. So it's really important to be aware of that. Some of the factors on the right-hand side are more focused on what it is that makes Kenyans successful as well. So huge amounts of sacrifice, strong mentality, the genetics, and also altitude training as well. Some of you who maybe have been to altitude with running or with skiing will know how tough it is to run at altitude. But when you do train there and you come back down to sea level, it's much, much easier to take on more oxygen and run quicker. I realised when you first see this slide, it's probably like a death by PowerPoint slide, so I'm definitely not going into each of these points, but I wanted to put it in here so that if anybody wants to have access to the presentation afterwards, you can have a look at these different points, and feel free to message me on social media if you have any questions regarding them. But the two that I really wanted to highlight were the 10% rule and monitoring volume and intensity, because for me, I've made the mistake so many times over the years of being really, really determined to get back to exercise, maybe after an injury, and coming back too quick. And so focusing on something like a 10% rule, where you only increase each week by 10%, is really important, and not just the volume. So by volume, I mean as a runner, it would be the mileage. So if you've done maybe 40 miles one week, don't jump up to 60 the next, because the chances are, if you continue to do that jump, you're going to get injured. But also looking at the intensity as well. So if you've done in 1 week maybe 2 jogs, don't the next week jump to 2 interval sessions. Just important to monitor that, and also think about whether your rest is really rest. So pardon me, if you have a rest day, try your best to make sure you're not on your feet the whole time, or lifting heavy things as well. And if you are doing that, probably you want to taper the training to be a little bit easier in the following days. This is a quote which I'm reading a book at the moment by Stephen Bartlett, and I thought this was just perfect for trying to convey this message. So he said that intensity equals a good story. So it can make a good story or a good social media post if you've done an amazing session and you want to share that. Whereas consistency is where you're going to make progress. And like I've mentioned already, I've over the years made the mistake so many times of doing hard session after hard session, and it just, you don't progress when you do it like that. And a good example he gave was that there can be an invisible momentum behind your training that can either work against you or it can work for you. And he gave the example for how an invisible momentum can work against you, in that his dentist, when he was younger, once told him, Stephen, it won't matter if you don't brush your teeth tomorrow, really. It won't matter if you don't brush them the next day. But if you don't brush them every day for the next year, then there's going to be an invisible momentum that's going to destroy your teeth and therefore working against you. Whereas the example he gave of an invisible momentum working for you was that the Grand Canyon was formed just by a river of water flowing over millions of years, and now it's created this 2,000 meter depth, I think it is. And that's just an example of slow progress over time can have big results. And I wanted to share these two screens here. One on the left is my training from a period in 2019, and the one on the right is my training just from the last few weeks. And I'm not saying I've got it right now, because you're always learning, but I think it's really, really important to recognize the mistakes that you can make as you're building back up. So you can see just down at the bottom of the bottom left screen, 50 miles was how many miles I ran in that week. I then jumped to 63, then down to 47 because 63 was probably too much, and down to 29. And so there's so many days where there's no exercise there as well, that most of them were due to me being too tired or picking up an injury. And you can see from the top of the left-hand graphic, there's then after that a long period of inactivity due to injury in that week that just was 15 miles in total. Whereas on the right-hand side, I'd built up over a couple of years through COVID just to gradually get up to around 70 miles a week. Went to 80, which was quite a big jump, but then made sure that the following week it was tapered down a bit, particularly with a race the following week, which you can see the races that are marked in red. And then you can see after that I was able to go back up to 70. So it's just an example of how the consistency that you build up over a period of time, just gradually increasing, can make huge progress rather than this sort of sporadic training in the graphic on the left-hand side. Again, these are ones I won't go into, but it's just maybe helpful for you to see after. It's just some example training programs for somebody that's starting out as a runner, somebody that's maybe got a little bit more experience, and then an advanced program as well. So again, feel free to message me on social media if anybody has any questions about those. Interval training is one of the biggest ways as a runner that you can improve quickly. So it depends what the goal is, but if you're trying to improve a time over, say, 5K or 10K or half marathon, interval training is one of the biggest factors. And so you might want to start by just putting one of these sessions in a week. They can be hill reps, they can be a progressive run, which is just starting at a slightly slower pace and gradually, maybe say it was a 5K run, you just try and increase the pace by 10 seconds per kilometre as each kilometre goes. And then there's examples as well of threshold training, which has become a big part of my training recently, and then also for 5K and 10K as well. I just want to finish off today by sharing 4 stories of really, really inspiring women that I've met along the way through athletics and through our charity work in Kenya, and how important it is to never give up, because situations can change, even if it doesn't seem like it at the time. The first story I'm going to share is that this lady, Christine, lived in the forest in an area in Kenya, just not too far from E10, and she was on the waiting list for a house. She got to the top of that waiting list, and the local chief of the area stole that opportunity, and it resulted in Christine living by the side of the road in this hut for 11 years, and her children, as they were born as well, were also living in these conditions. And that's Isaac and Bernard, where they were sleeping just on sacks on the ground. The kitchen was in one corner of the house, so because of the charcoal they use, there's this smoke that's in your eyes and your lungs the whole time. And then up above is just where they stored their clothes. But Christine never gave up hope. Anytime I met her, she was always very positive and smiling, despite the real challenges they were facing. And in 2018, a group of volunteers through Guthrie Edwards Foundation were able to build Christine and her family a new 3-bedroom house. And it's amazing to see them living happily and comfortably in that house now. So it's a good example of how, even if you're in the situation Christine was for 11 years, she still had that positivity and resilience that things would get better. The second story I'm going to share is a lady, Mary Katani, who is a well-known athlete, and for many years in E10, this was probably the closest, this shop, the London Marathon store, which didn't sell anything to do with running, it just sold groceries, but for many years it's the closest she would have come to the London Marathon. In her first race, which was a 10K race in E10, she finished 21st, and there was prizes down to the 20th position. And she said to the race organizer, Toby Tanzer, after that race, she vowed never to finish out with the prize money positions again. And she sacrificed a lot. She really, really worked hard in training over a number of years. and went on to win the London Marathon 3 times and the New York Marathon 4 times, as well as many other races. And the change that she's been able to make to her life, her family's life, and also the community around her as well, with the millions that she's won, has been amazing. And so another great example of why it's important to try your best never to give up. Second from last, Catherine Switzer is a remarkable lady who my family has been fortunate to be friends with. In 1967, it was, in the Boston Marathon. At that point, women were not allowed to enter marathons. And so Catherine entered under the name KV Switzer, so it didn't get picked up that she was a woman when she was entering. During the race, she was the race organizer tried to push her out of the race. Now, fortunately, she was running with her boyfriend at the time, who was an Olympic shot putter, and he pushed the race organizer away. As it turned out, later in life, Catherine became really good friends with this race organizer, Jock Semple, and his whole mindset changed as a result of what Catherine was trying to achieve. And what Catherine's gone on to achieve for so many women has been quite incredible. And I think it's fair to say that the likes of Mary Keitany may not have had the opportunity to run in marathons had it not been for Catherine Switzer. And she played a huge part in it being possible for this year 24,028 women to finish the London Marathon. And 3,941 women have now completed the amazing achievement of all 6 major marathons, so finishing all 6, and they include New York, Chicago, Boston, Berlin, Tokyo, and London. And Catherine faced huge challenges and huge abuse after that act that she did, but it's changed the future for so many people. And so another example just of how it might seem like something's really difficult at the time, but anything is possible. And just to finish off, I'm going to share, this is a slogan that Adidas have made quite popular, but a great example of how nothing is impossible, or as impossible as nothing, as Adidas say it. Faith Wanjiku is a girl who we support in Kenya, and Faith and her mum both suffer from a genetic condition, which means they don't have any hands or feet. And when Faith's mum, Felista, when she was younger, her dad just didn't believe in her at all. And he told her that she was not going to achieve anything in life, and effectively disowned her. But we've been so fortunate to get to know both of them. We first went to visit a school where about 500 or so children were lined up and they're high-fiving the volunteers that had been over their house building. And I realised that Faith didn't have hands, and so went to visit her in the classroom to see how she was doing. She was position 5 out of 52 in her class. Her handwriting was incredible, much better than mine. We went to visit Faith and her mum at home after that, and this is where they were living. So there's water coming through the roof, water coming in the walls, wheelbarrow in the bedroom, not proper mattresses. But again, despite that, they were so positive and very resilient as well. Thanks to a number of volunteers who raised money to build a house for Faith, we were able to do that. And during the building, Faith and her mum insisted on refilling the tank of water that the builders required for the building. And Faith would go down this slippery path to the river with this yellow jerry can, filling it up with water. And Faith's mum had 18 litres of water on her head, just because they were so appreciative of what the builders were doing for them. And this was the house just shortly before it was completed. And it's amazing to see Faith and her mum thriving in various ways. Her mum started her own business and is doing well. But Felista set an incredible example for Faith. She, despite having no hands and feet, she walks around very quickly. She chops firewood, she cooks, she cleans. She's given Faith an amazing attitude, but also as many opportunities as possible as well. And Faith's quite a character. She is, as you can see on the left, this is one of about 400 selfies when I gave my phone to Faith on that occasion. And she always proudly wears her Aberdeen top as well. But the reason I share Faith's story today is that it's really important in life that if anybody ever tells you you're not capable of achieving something, whether it's because of age, ability, gender, anything, it's really important to do all you can to prove them wrong, and think of inspiring people like Faith or people that inspire you. And as I say, do absolutely everything to prove them wrong. So thank you very much for listening today. I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Myles. That was very, very inspiring. It makes me want to go out and run now. So Kay Watson as well, saying thank you very much. It's really interesting and inspiring. I just have a couple of questions myself, if that's all right. So you talked a lot about how consistency is key, yeah? So a lot of our rig run participants, they'll spend a lot of time away from home, or perhaps they'll have 2 or 3 weeks where they're at home and then go away and have to work shift work. So have you got any tips on how to maintain your progress when your routine's disrupted? I
Really
suppose it
good
doesn't have to be
question.
work, it could be family as well and other commitments and things.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I can't relate to it in terms of those long periods away where you're maybe, stuck to a treadmill or gym equipment, but I think it's important to really plan for that. So, for example, from in my experience with going to Kenya, it's the altitude's the factor that you really need to taper down because it's a different environment. And so I think probably what you'd want to do if it was running, you'd want to be doing a decent bit of treadmill running when you're at home so that you can then replicate that when you're out there. Because I think, if you suddenly go from running on one surface to then 3 weeks of maybe fairly intense exercise out there on a treadmill, it can then cause injury. It is difficult, but I think it's just individual to each person's situation. So try to do as much of what you're going to be doing if you're offshore. Try to be doing that at home as well, so that you can get some sort of consistency. Because it's not easy, but it's doable.
Yeah. I think it's as well, like you say, it's maintaining that mindset of remembering why you're doing it, and doing a little bit is better than doing nothing, isn't it? So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because just getting that little bit in could be the difference between, maybe not reaching your goal at the end and reaching it. So yeah, if you can do something small every day, every couple of days, then over time it can make a big difference.
one more question. Okay, so during the rig run competition, you'll see teams and individuals move up and down the league tables quite a lot, because obviously the competition can last for up to 6 weeks. So how do you deal with that when perhaps one day you're up at the top and the next day or the next week things are not going so well? Any tips
Yes,
on how to?
it's really difficult as well, but I think the thing to focus on, because it's easy for me to say, don't compare yourself to other people. I think it's important to not compare yourself to other people too much, because it's good to, I'd be lying if I said I don't compare myself to somebody who's of a similar ability that maybe sometimes beats me and I sometimes beat them. So my advice would be focus on yourself in terms of your own training, and just do the next best thing that you can do to improve. So each day, just do one good thing, because over that period of time, it will build up, and hopefully you then see yourself climbing up the leaderboard. And if that doesn't happen, maybe the next year you look at your training and you review it and you see what you could improve on, what you could maybe increase. So yeah, I think just focusing on that next day, rather than, because it can be quite overwhelming, I think, if things are not going as well as you'd hoped. But just by focusing on the next best thing you can do to improve yourself, hopefully over time would get you climbing back up the leaderboard.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, I'm certainly inspired anyway. So I don't think there's any other questions. So thank you very much for your time today. It was brilliant. Really enjoyed it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Best of
See you
luck.
next time, everyone.
See ya.